Right now, as you watch this video, the currency in your pocket is dying. Not slowly. Not eventually. Right now. And here's what terrifies economists who actually understand monetary history: every single currency that has ever collapsed followed the exact same 7-stage pattern. The Roman denarius. The French assignat. The German Papiermark. The Hungarian pengo. The Zimbabwean dollar. The Venezuelan bolivar. 7 stages. The same 7 stages. Every single time. And when researchers plotted where the United States dollar currently sits on this pattern, they discovered something that made them go silent. The dollar has already passed stage 5. It's entering stage 6. But here's what keeps me awake at night, and what should keep you awake too: by the time most people recognize stage 6, stage 7 becomes inevitable. And stage 7? That's the complete collapse. The total destruction of purchasing power. The moment when a lifetime of savings becomes worthless paper. The average person never sees it coming. They can't see it coming, because they don't know the pattern exists. But after the next 25 minutes, you will know. You will see what others cannot see. You will understand what governments desperately hope you never figure out. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Let me take you back 3,000 years, to the first recorded instance of this pattern, because what happened then is happening again right now. And this time, you're living through it. The year was 211 BC, and Rome had a problem that sounds remarkably familiar to anyone living in the 21st century. The Roman Republic had just emerged from a devastating war against Carthage. The Second Punic War had drained every resource the Republic possessed. Hannibal's armies had marched through Italy for 15 years, burning crops, destroying cities, and decimating the Roman military. The treasury wasn't just depleted, it was empty. Military expenses were astronomical. Veterans needed to be paid. Destroyed infrastructure needed rebuilding. The government needed money it simply didn't have to fund recovery it couldn't afford to delay. So the Roman Senate did something that would echo through the next 2,000 years of human history. They looked at their currency, the silver denarius, and they asked a dangerous question: what if we could create more money without actually having more silver? The denarius at that time contained about 4.5 grams of pure silver. It was real money. It had intrinsic value. You couldn't fake it, couldn't manipulate it, couldn't conjure it from thin air. A Roman soldier knew that his payment represented actual precious metal. A merchant knew that the coins in his strongbox held genuine worth independent of any government decree. Or so people believed. The first stage of the pattern had begun. Stage 1 is always the same: fiscal pressure creates monetary temptation. A government faces expenses it cannot meet through taxation or legitimate borrowing. The currency sits there, seemingly solid, but suddenly looking like a tool that could be bent, just slightly, to solve the immediate crisis. Every empire reaches this moment. Every government faces this temptation. The ones that resist it survive. The ones that succumb to it begin their descent into monetary oblivion. Rome succumbed. What Rome did next created a template that every failing empire would follow for millennia. They began to reduce the silver content of the denarius, replacing precious metal with base metals like copper and bronze. Not by much. Not enough for anyone to notice. Just a small percentage here, a tiny reduction there. The coins looked the same. They felt almost the same. They spent the same. But they contained a hidden lie. This is stage 2, the initial debasement. It's always presented as a temporary measure, an emergency response to unusual circumstances. Roman officials assured citizens that the currency remained sound. They pointed to economic growth, military victories, and expanding territory as proof that Rome had never been stronger. The slight reduction in silver content was a minor technical adjustment, nothing more. And for a while, nothing seemed wrong. The economy continued functioning. Trade continued flowing. People continued trusting their money. Life went on as it always had. But something invisible had changed. A precedent had been established. A door had been opened that could never be closed again. The seed of destruction had been planted in Roman soil. Here's what makes stage 2 so dangerous: it works. The government gets the money it needs. The crisis passes. Citizens remain unaware of what has been done to their currency. And the lesson learned by those in power is catastrophic: we got away with it. That lesson echoes through the halls of power for generations. Each new crisis brings the memory of how easily the last one was solved. Each new fiscal pressure recalls the tool that worked so effectively before. Emperor Nero inherited this lesson in 54 AD. Facing his own financial pressures, expensive building projects, military campaigns, and a lifestyle of legendary extravagance, he remembered what his predecessors had discovered. The denarius had been debased slightly before, and nothing bad had happened. Why not debase it a little more? Under Nero, the silver content dropped from 4.5 grams to 3.8 grams. That's a 16% reduction in real value while the face value remained exactly the same. To the average Roman, nothing had changed. The coin still bore the emperor's face. They still purchased goods in the marketplace. They still paid taxes and salaries. But Nero had discovered something that would intoxicate rulers for millennia: he could spend money that didn't exist by secretly stealing from everyone who held currency. Every denarius in circulation became slightly less valuable, and that stolen value flowed directly into the imperial treasury. It was the perfect crime, a theft so subtle that the victims didn't even know they were being robbed. This is stage 3, the acceleration of debasement. What started as an emergency measure becomes standard policy. Each new fiscal crisis, each new war, each new public works project becomes an excuse for further reduction. The government becomes addicted to the power of currency manipulation, and like all addictions, this one demands ever-increasing doses. After Nero came emperor after emperor, each facing their own pressures, each reaching for the same solution. Marcus Aurelius debased the currency to fund his wars against Germanic tribes. Commodus debased it further to finance his games and spectacles. Septimius Severus slashed the silver content to pay his armies. By the time Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, the denarius contained only 75% silver. By 218 AD, under the chaotic reign of Elagabalus, it was down to 50%. By 268 AD, during the crisis of the 3rd century, the silver content had dropped to just 5%. Think about that progression. A coin that once contained 4.5 grams of pure silver now contained less than a quarter gram. The Roman government had stolen more than 95% of the currency's real value while maintaining the fiction that nothing had changed. The coin still circulated. The economy still functioned. But the money had become a hollow shell, a lie stamped in metal. This is stage 4, the collapse of real value beneath maintained nominal value. The numbers on the coin stay the same, but what those numbers can buy begins to evaporate. Prices start rising, slowly at first, then with increasing velocity. The cost of bread, of olive oil, of wine, of cloth, everything begins climbing in a way that feels wrong but remains difficult to explain. Roman citizens began to notice something was deeply wrong. The bread that cost 1 denarius last year now cost 2. Then 3. Then 5. Then 10. Their wages stayed the same while their purchasing power melted away like snow in the Mediterranean sun. A soldier's salary, once enough to support a family, now barely covered basic necessities. But here's the insidious part: most people blamed the wrong culprits. They blamed the merchants for being greedy. They blamed the bakers for raising prices. They blamed the farmers for charging more for grain. They blamed the craftsmen for demanding higher payments. They organized boycotts and protests and called for government action against these profiteers. They didn't understand that the money itself had become a lie. The merchants weren't greedy, they were responding rationally to a currency that bought less with each passing month. The bakers weren't villains, they were trying to cover costs that kept rising because the money kept falling. The entire economy was adjusting to a reality that the government desperately wanted to hide. Stage 5 arrives when the people begin to lose faith in the currency itself. Not all at once. Not uniformly. But in whispers and private transactions, alternatives emerge. Roman citizens started demanding payment in goods rather than currency. A farmer would sell his grain for tools or cloth rather than accept denarii that might be worth less by the time he spent them. Merchants began conducting business in kind, trading products directly without the intermediary of money. Workers negotiated for food and lodging rather than wages. People began hoarding older coins that still contained real silver. A denarius from Augustus's reign was worth far more than its face value because it actually contained silver. These old coins became a shadow currency, used for important transactions while the debased official currency was spent as quickly as possible. A psychological shift occurred that would doom the Roman monetary system. People stopped trusting the money. They stopped believing that a coin today would buy the same goods tomorrow. They stopped saving in currency and started accumulating real assets: land, livestock, tools, stored grain, anything that couldn't be debased by imperial decree. The government's response to Stage 5 accelerated the arrival of Stage 6. Emperor Diocletian, facing an economy in chaos, issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD. This remarkable document set maximum legal prices for over 1,000 goods and services, covering everything from wheat to wool, from haircuts to freight charges. The penalties were severe: death for violations, death for hoarding, death for refusing to bring goods to market. Diocletian genuinely believed he was saving the economy. He looked at rising prices and concluded that merchants were to blame. If only he could force them to charge reasonable amounts, prosperity would return. If only he could compel farmers to sell at fair prices, the people would be fed. If only he could mandate wages and costs, the economic chaos would end. This is Stage 6, government intervention that treats symptoms while ignoring the disease. Price controls. Wage controls. Capital controls. Currency restrictions. Mandatory acceptance laws. Penalties for using alternative currencies or barter. Penalties for hoarding. Penalties for speculation. The government fights desperately to maintain the fiction of monetary stability through force. It never works. It cannot work. Because the problem isn't greedy merchants or evil speculators or criminal hoarders. The problem is that the money itself has died, and no law can resurrect it. You cannot legislate value into a worthless currency. You cannot decree purchasing power into existence. You cannot arrest your way to monetary stability. Diocletian's price controls created immediate and predictable consequences. Merchants refused to sell at mandated prices, preferring to hide their goods or stop producing entirely. Why grow grain if you're forced to sell it below the cost of production? Why manufacture goods if the legal price doesn't cover your expenses? Why transport products to market if you'll be executed for charging enough to make the trip worthwhile? Shortages exploded across the empire. Markets emptied. Goods disappeared from legal commerce and reappeared in black markets at prices far higher than before the controls. The economy didn't stabilize, it fragmented. Legal commerce gave way to hidden transactions. Trust gave way to fear. Prosperity gave way to survival. The edict on maximum prices was quietly abandoned within a few years. But the damage was done. The Roman economy had been shattered by the combination of worthless currency and impossible regulations. The complex web of trade that had united the empire began to unravel. Stage 7 arrived with the inevitability of sunrise. By the 4th century, the Roman monetary system had effectively collapsed. The denarius became so worthless that people refused to accept it for any transaction. The government itself stopped collecting taxes in currency and demanded payment in goods, grain, cloth, labor, anything with actual value. Soldiers were paid in food and land rather than coins that bought nothing. Trade reverted to barter on a scale not seen for centuries. The sophisticated economy that had allowed specialization and efficiency fractured into local subsistence economies. A province that once exported grain across the Mediterranean now struggled to feed itself. A city that once produced goods for empire-wide markets now made only what its immediate residents needed. Tax collection became nearly impossible, starving the government of revenue. How do you tax a barter economy? How do you collect grain from farmers who hide their harvest? How do you fund an empire when the money doesn't work? Military payments couldn't be made reliably, leading to the fragmentation of Roman defense. Soldiers who weren't paid reliably stopped fighting reliably. Legions became loyal to whoever could feed them rather than to distant emperors who sent worthless coins. The unified military machine that had conquered the known world dissolved into regional warbands following local strongmen. The Western Roman Empire didn't fall because of barbarian invasions. The barbarians had always been at the borders. The empire had defeated them countless times before. What changed was Rome's ability to respond. The empire fell because it destroyed its own money. The barbarians simply walked through a door that monetary collapse had opened. They didn't conquer a strong empire, they occupied the ruins of one that had committed financial suicide. This pattern took 300 years to complete in Rome. The next time it happened, history would move much faster. France, 1789. A revolution had overthrown the monarchy, and the new government faced a problem as old as Rome itself: empty coffers and expensive ambitions. The National Assembly looked at the vast properties of the Catholic Church, recently confiscated by the revolutionary government, and saw a solution that seemed brilliant in its elegance. They would issue paper currency called assignats, backed by this confiscated land. As the land was sold, the corresponding assignats would be destroyed, maintaining the currency's value through a direct connection to real assets. It was a brilliant plan on paper. It addressed every objection that sound money advocates could raise. The currency would be backed by tangible assets. The supply would be controlled and ultimately reduced. There was no possibility of overissuance because the assignats were tied to a finite quantity of land. The first issue of assignats totaled 400 million livres. The National Assembly made solemn speeches about the importance of fiscal responsibility. They promised this would be the only issue. They created elaborate procedures to ensure the currency would remain backed by real assets. They assured the French people that there was absolutely no need for concern. The promise lasted less than 2 years. Within 24 months, 2.7 billion livres of assignats circulated through the French economy. The land backing had become a fiction. The controls had been abandoned. The solemn promises had evaporated under the pressure of revolutionary expenses, foreign wars, and domestic chaos. This is how the 7 stages accelerate when paper currency replaces commodity currency. Paper can be printed infinitely. There is no physical constraint, no need to mine silver or acquire gold. The temptation that took Rome centuries to fully embrace took France mere months. Each crisis brought new printing. Each emergency required more assignats. The wars against Austria and Prussia demanded military spending. The internal rebellions required government response. The bread shortages necessitated subsidies. The economy's difficulties called for stimulus. By 1795, 40 billion livres of assignats had been printed. Prices had increased by 13,000%. A measure of flour that cost 2 livres in 1790 cost 225 livres in 1795. The savings of an entire nation had been vaporized in just 6 years. The French government tried price controls, just as Diocletian had 15 centuries earlier. They passed the law of the maximum, setting ceiling prices for grain and other necessities. The results were identical to Rome's experience. Shortages exploded. Black markets flourished. Producers stopped producing. The economy collapsed further. They tried mandatory acceptance laws, requiring citizens to accept assignats at face value for all transactions. Those who refused faced prosecution. Those who demanded gold or silver instead of paper faced imprisonment. Those who hoarded were executed. None of it worked. The pattern was inescapable. In 1796, the assignat became so worthless that the printing plates were publicly destroyed in an elaborate ceremony. The government acknowledged what everyone already knew: the currency had died. The entire experiment had lasted 7 years from beginning to total collapse. But France didn't learn. No one ever learns. In 1800, Napoleon established the franc, promising stability and sound money. He created the Bank of France and implemented policies designed to prevent another assignat disaster. And for a while, it worked. The franc became respected throughout Europe. French monetary policy became a model for other nations. By 1914, the franc had lost 99% of its purchasing power. The pattern repeated, slower but no less certain. The stages unfolded over generations rather than years, but they unfolded nonetheless. Fiscal pressure led to debasement. Debasement accelerated. Value collapsed. Faith eroded. The government intervened. The currency died. Germany, 1914. The First World War began, and the German government faced a choice that every wartime government faces: raise taxes to pay for the war, or borrow and print money. Taxes are unpopular. Taxes are visible. Taxes generate opposition and resistance. Every mark raised through taxation is a mark that citizens consciously give up, a mark that might turn voters against the government. Printing money is invisible. Printing money seems costless. The bills look the same. The economy continues functioning. No one marches in the streets to protest monetary expansion. No one votes against politicians for debasing the currency. Germany chose the invisible path. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, began financing the war through money creation rather than taxation. Bonds were issued and immediately purchased with newly created marks. The money supply expanded to cover military expenses, and the government assured citizens that everything would be sorted out after victory. By the war's end in 1918, the money supply had quadrupled. Prices had roughly doubled. The mark had lost half its purchasing power, but the change had occurred gradually enough that most Germans barely noticed. They were distracted by the war, by rationing, by the demands of the conflict. Stage 2 was complete, and the country remained largely unaware of the time bomb ticking in its monetary system. Then came the Treaty of Versailles. The victorious Allies imposed reparations on Germany that economists immediately recognized as impossible to pay. Germany owed 132 billion gold marks, a sum that exceeded the nation's total wealth. The payments were structured to continue for generations. The country was being ordered to pay for its defeat forever. The Weimar government had 3 options: default on the payments and face military occupation, impose crushing taxation and face domestic revolution, or print the money and hope for the best. They printed. What happened next became the most famous hyperinflation in history, studied in every economics class, referenced in every discussion of monetary policy. But what's less understood is how precisely it followed the same 7 stages Rome had pioneered 17 centuries earlier. Stage 3 accelerated through 1919, 1920, and 1921. The money supply expanded continuously to meet reparation payments, to cover government deficits, to support an economy struggling under the weight of defeat. Each month brought more printing. Each crisis brought more marks. Stage 4 hit Germany in early 1921. Prices began rising noticeably. The mark, which had traded at 4.2 to the dollar before the war, fell to 75 to the dollar by early 1921. Germans noticed that their money bought less, but the changes still seemed manageable. Life continued with adjustments. Stage 5 arrived in earnest in 1922. Germans began losing faith in the papiermark and seeking alternatives. Anyone with savings tried to convert them into foreign currencies: dollars, Swiss francs, British pounds. Farmers refused to sell food for marks, demanding goods or gold instead. Workers negotiated for payment in kind rather than cash. The velocity of money increased as people spent their marks as quickly as possible, knowing they would be worth less tomorrow. Stage 6 exploded in early 1923. The government implemented increasingly desperate measures to maintain the currency's fiction. Currency export was banned. Foreign exchange transactions were criminalized. Price controls were attempted. Anyone caught hoarding or speculating faced severe penalties. And Stage 7 delivered the killing blow. In January 1923, $1 equaled 17,000 papier marks. By July, it was 353,000 marks. By August, 4.6 million marks. By September, 98 million marks. By October, 25 billion marks. By November 1923, $1 equaled 4.2 trillion marks. Let that number sink in. Trillion. With a T. The mark had lost so much value that the numbers became meaningless. A currency that had been one of the world's most stable had become one of history's greatest disasters. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November. Workers were paid twice daily because the money would lose significant value between morning and afternoon. People ran from the pay window to the shops, desperate to convert their wages into goods before the marks became worthless. Wives waited outside factories on payday, rushing to buy anything available before prices rose again. People burned currency for heat because it was cheaper than buying firewood. A basket of marks might buy a basket of wood, or you could simply burn the marks directly. Children played with stacks of worthless bills, building towers and houses for money that couldn't buy a piece of candy. An entire lifetime of savings couldn't buy a newspaper. The photographs from this era are haunting and should be required viewing for anyone who trusts government currency. Elderly women carrying wheelbarrows of cash to buy groceries. Children using bricks of bundled marks as building blocks. A man wallpapering his house with currency because it was cheaper than actual wallpaper. A restaurant crossing out prices every few hours as they became obsolete. The social fabric of Germany was destroyed along with the currency. The middle class was wiped out. Professionals who had saved for retirement found their life's work reduced to nothing. Teachers, doctors, engineers, people who had done everything right, who had saved responsibly, who had trusted the system, discovered that their trust had been betrayed. This destruction created the conditions for what came next. A devastated population, a humiliated nation, a ruined economy, this was the soil in which extremism grew. The Nazi Party, a fringe movement in 1923, would ride the economic chaos and its aftermath to power within a decade. But here's what most history books don't tell you: the people who understood the pattern, who saw the stages unfolding, who acted before Stage 7, they protected themselves. They bought real assets when marks could still purchase them. They acquired foreign currencies while exchange was still possible. They preserved their wealth while their neighbors lost everything. A factory owner who converted his profits to dollars in 1921 emerged from the hyperinflation wealthy. His competitor who kept his money in marks was ruined. An investor who bought real estate in 1922 owned valuable property when the chaos ended. A saver who trusted the banks lost everything. Knowledge of the pattern is the difference between survival and destruction. Now let me show you why this history lesson isn't academic. Let me show you where the United States dollar currently sits on the 7-stage pattern. Stage 1, fiscal pressure creating monetary temptation. occurred in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve. For the first time in American history, the United States had a central bank with the power to create currency. The temptation that had destroyed Rome and France and Germany now had an institutional vehicle in the world's largest economy. Stage 2, initial debasement, began almost immediately. The dollar was still linked to gold, but the Federal Reserve began expanding the money supply beyond gold reserves. During World War I, significant monetary expansion occurred. The money supply doubled while gold reserves remained relatively constant. The fiction of gold backing became a fiction indeed. After the war, the Federal Reserve allowed a contraction, and the Depression of 1920 to 1921 resulted, sharp but brief. The economy corrected. Malinvestments were liquidated. Recovery came quickly. But the government learned the wrong lesson from this experience. They concluded that monetary contraction was dangerous and should be avoided at all costs. When the next crisis came, they would expand and never contract. They would prevent the short-term pain of correction and guarantee the long-term catastrophe of sustained inflation. Stage 3, acceleration, kicked into high gear during the Great Depression and World War II. The money supply exploded to fund recovery programs, war production, and the emergence of America as a global superpower. The dollar's gold backing became increasingly theoretical as the amount of currency vastly exceeded the gold available to redeem it. Then came 1971. The moment that future historians may mark as the beginning of the end. President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold. The gold window was closed. The Bretton Woods system collapsed. For the first time in American history, the dollar became pure fiat currency, money by government decree, backed by nothing but trust. Nixon promised the measure was temporary. It has now lasted over 50 years. Stage 4 began that day and has continued ever since. The collapse of real value beneath maintained nominal value. In 1971, the average American home cost $25,000. Today, that same home costs over $400,000. That's not because homes have become more valuable, it's because dollars have become less valuable. In 1971, the average new car cost $3,500. Today, the average new car costs over $48,000. The car has improved, certainly, but not by a factor of 14. In 1971, the average annual income was $10,000. Today, it's around $60,000. Wages have increased sixfold while housing has increased 16-fold. Americans are running faster and falling further behind. In 1971, a gallon of gas cost 36 cents. Today, it costs between $3 and $4. In 1971, a first-class stamp cost 8 cents. Today, it costs 68 cents. In 1971, a McDonald's hamburger cost 18 cents. Today, it costs over $2. Every single item in the economy costs more dollars because every single dollar is worth less. Since 1971, the dollar has lost over 87% of its purchasing power. The money in your pocket is worth less than 13 cents compared to when Nixon made his announcement. If you had saved $1 million in 1971 and kept it in cash, it would buy today what $130,000 bought then. This is stage 4 in action. This is the stealth theft that debasing governments have perpetrated for 3 millennia. This is Rome and France and Germany playing out again in slow motion. Stage 5, loss of faith, began accelerating in 2008. The financial crisis revealed the fragility of the entire system. Banks that were supposed to be solid failed overnight. The economy that was supposed to be stable collapsed. The institutions that were supposed to be trustworthy proved to be hollow. The Federal Reserve's response showed the world exactly how the system works. They created trillions of dollars from nothing, not metaphorically, literally from nothing. Electronic entries on a computer conjured purchasing power into existence. The currency's value was revealed to be purely arbitrary, dependent on nothing more than belief. Then came 2020. In a single year, the Federal Reserve created more dollars than had been created in the first 200 years of American history. Let that sink in. More money was printed in 12 months than in the 2 centuries from the Revolution through the bicentennial. The M2 money supply, the measure of dollars in circulation plus savings and related accounts, increased by over 40% in less than 2 years. The monetary base exploded. The charts showing dollar creation went vertical, nearly straight up. This is late stage 5. The signs are everywhere for those who know how to read them. The petrodollar system that has maintained global demand for dollars is fracturing. Saudi Arabia now discusses selling oil in other currencies. China trades with Russia in yuan and rubles. Major economies are creating systems specifically designed to avoid the dollar. Central banks around the world are accumulating gold at the fastest pace in decades. These institutions understand monetary history. They know what happens to fiat currencies. They are preparing for what comes next. Cryptocurrency has emerged as an alternative to government money, embraced by millions who have lost faith in traditional currency. Whether these alternatives succeed or fail, their existence demonstrates the erosion of trust in official money. The faith that sustained the dollar's value is cracking. Stage 6 is beginning now. You can see it in the increasing government intervention in markets. Quantitative easing has become permanent rather than emergency. Interest rate manipulation has become constant rather than occasional. The Federal Reserve now directly purchases corporate bonds, mortgage securities, and other assets that were once considered far beyond its mandate. You can see it in the discussions of central bank digital currencies. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of China, all are exploring digital currencies that would give governments unprecedented control over money. They could track every transaction. They could program the currency to expire if not spent. They could prevent purchases they disapproved of. They could implement negative interest rates that would make saving impossible. You can see it in the proposals for price controls that emerge whenever inflation becomes politically uncomfortable. Politicians propose capping grocery prices, rent prices, gas prices, treating symptoms exactly as Diocletian did, with exactly the same results. You can see it in the capital controls being implemented around the world. Countries restrict how much currency can leave their borders. They limit foreign investments. They impose penalties on those who try to protect their wealth from currency collapse. The pattern is accelerating. The stages that took Rome 3 centuries are taking the dollar 3 generations. And stage 7? Stage 7 is the collapse that everyone says could never happen here. The same collapse that everyone in Rome said could never happen. The same collapse that everyone in France said could never happen. The same collapse that everyone in Germany said could never happen. Until it did. Here's what I need you to understand. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. Fear is not productive. Panic is not helpful. I'm telling you this because knowledge is protection. Every time this pattern has played out across 3,000 years of human history, there have been 2 groups of people. The first group didn't see it coming. They trusted the official assurances. They believed the government when it said the currency was sound. They kept their wealth in the dying money. They were destroyed. The second group understood the pattern. They recognized the stages. They saw the signs that others missed. They took action while action was still possible. They preserved their wealth and often built greater wealth from the chaos. The difference between these 2 groups was not intelligence. Brilliant people have been ruined in every currency collapse. It was not wealth. The rich and the comfortable have lost everything in every hyperinflation. It was not connections. The well-connected and the powerful have been devastated alongside everyone else. The difference was knowledge. The difference was understanding the pattern. The difference was seeing stage 3 and recognizing what stage 4 would bring. The difference was acting on what they knew rather than hoping it would somehow be different this time. Now you have that knowledge. You understand the 7 stages in a way that most people never will. You can see the pattern that has repeated throughout human history, and you can see where we currently stand within that pattern. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Throughout history, those who preserved their wealth during currency collapses shared common strategies. They diversified out of the failing currency while it still had value. They acquired real assets, land, commodities, productive businesses, things that would have value regardless of what happened to the money. They held currencies from nations not following the same pattern. They built skills and relationships that would be valuable in any economy. These strategies worked in Rome for those who saw what was happening to the denarius. They worked in France for those who understood the Assignat's trajectory. They worked in Germany for those who recognized the papier mark's collapse. They worked everywhere the pattern has played out. They can work for you. But only if you act while action is still possible. Stage 7 comes faster than anyone expects. The progression from late stage 5 through stage 6 to stage 7 can happen in months, not years. The window for preparation is open today, but it won't stay open forever. What happened to Rome wasn't ancient history. It wasn't a unique event caused by unique circumstances. It was the first iteration of a pattern that has repeated dozens of times across thousands of years. That pattern is playing out again, right now, in real time. You are living through it. The denarius died. The assignat died. The papier mark died. Every fiat currency in history has eventually died. The average lifespan of a fiat currency is about 40 years. The dollar has been pure fiat since 1971, over 50 years ago. The dollar is not exempt from history. No currency ever has been. No empire has ever debased its way to prosperity. No government has ever printed its way to stability. The pattern doesn't have exceptions. The only question is whether you'll be prepared when the pattern completes. I've spent years researching this topic, diving into primary sources, reading accounts from those who lived through these collapses, analyzing the economic data, because I believe this knowledge can change lives. It changed mine. Understanding the pattern of monetary collapse transformed how I think about wealth, about savings, about the future. If this information resonated with you, if you felt something shift in your understanding, if you're looking at your own financial situation differently now, I want to ask you something. Think about the people in your life who need to hear this. The family members who trust their savings accounts. The friends who think their retirement is secure. The colleagues who don't understand why things keep getting more expensive. They're sleepwalking toward a crisis they don't see coming. Share this with them. Send them this video. Have the conversation that might change their future. And I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling me what stage you think we're currently in. I read every single comment, and the discussions that happen here are some of the most insightful conversations happening anywhere about monetary policy. Where do you see us on the pattern? What signs are you noticing in your own experience? If you want to continue learning, to understand not just the pattern but the specific strategies that have protected wealth throughout history, consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. I'm creating a complete series on monetary history and wealth preservation because I believe this information should be available to everyone, not just the financial elite who already know these patterns and use them to protect themselves. The Roman citizens who understood what was happening to the denarius didn't just survive, they thrived during the chaos. The French merchants who recognized the assignat's trajectory protected their families while others lost everything. The German investors who saw the papier mark's collapse coming emerged from Weimar stronger than they entered. Knowledge of the pattern is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter how much wealth you have right now. What matters is whether you understand what's coming and whether you have time to prepare. You now understand the pattern. You've seen the 7 stages unfold across 3,000 years. You know where the dollar sits within that progression. The question is what you'll do with that understanding. The next few years will likely be the most financially volatile of our lifetimes. Some people will be devastated by that volatility. They'll watch their savings evaporate, their retirement disappear, their children's futures vanish. Others will be positioned to not just survive but prosper. They'll see the opportunities that chaos creates. They'll have the assets that hold value when currency fails. They'll emerge stronger. The difference is knowledge. The difference is preparation. The difference is understanding what happened to the denarius, the assignat, the papiermark, and recognizing that the dollar is following the same path. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes. And right now, the rhyme is getting louder. Can you hear it?